We're not in Oxford anymore. Well, in some ways we are, but not Lyra's Oxford. We are venturing into whole new worlds for season 2 of His Dark Materials, which brings along new friends and some more enemies. Don't forget to follow along on this adventure by hitting that subscribe button. And now that that's been said, let's shift into our book versus discussion. It is pretty clear that if I'm discussing this series, it will include spoilers because it isn't a proper comparison without it.
I've traveled so far. I found myself here, and Jordan's gone, and I don't know where to go. I need to find out about Dust, because if I don't find out about Dust, it will all be for nothing.
Now, in season 1, we quickly learn that Lyra has a destiny before her. She is supposed to be negligent in order to not compromise her actions amongst this larger war. Lyra is linked to the alethiometer, which will allow her to find the truth in figuring out the importance of Dust, the truth of locating Will's father, and the truth of finding her friend Roger. This destiny lies between Lyra and Will, where their lives are now entangled with each other, and along the way, they gain a friendship.
I found out how important it is, how it's a part of me. So if it says I need to help Will, then that's what I've got to do.
In my season 1 video, we lightly chatted about Will, but I truly kept him for this season because he was introduced in book 2, The Subtle Knife. His fate is linked with Lyra's, but they each have their own path to follow. Will is quite the unique child. He lives with his mother and he cares deeply for her. In the book, it discusses how he helps his mother and is always aware of her needs. He protects her from unwelcome house guests and even rude classmates, so much so that he's getting into frequent fights. The book does really well of showing Will of a calmer nature by having him play the piano, and when he needs to leave his mother to protect her, she is left in the gentle presence of his old piano teacher. I really love this detail, as his mother is always frightened, and to keep her in a relaxing setting is very beneficial to her overall health. The show decided to use a wrestling coach instead. He was kind, and he is visibly taking care of his mother in season 2. I see how this choice of a hobby adds to helping Will control his anger and is a more common sport for a boy to relate to, especially since it's only him versus an opponent. It seems to just be more fitting. But I'm just also happy it wasn't a common sport like soccer or baseball. Lyra is certainly intrigued by the new world she is stepping into, but she is very reflective of the differences. You don't get a vibe from her of being fearful, we actually sense her fully embracing the new places. When she finally goes to Will's Oxford, she isn't afraid to separate herself from Will to get the information that she wants. Once Lyra has a mission, she is very devoted to searching out the task. From visiting the museum and even meeting with Mary Malone, who is the ever-important dark matter scientist. She is sure to tell her how to best utilize her equipment to the fullest. In the book, we fully grasp Lyra's intelligence. I feel the show did her justice on this point, but Lyra is more than just intelligent. She is crafty too. We see her take action by making her own omelet, or attempt of an omelet after learning from Will.
You're the one who taught me how to do it.
You seem to have added your own twist to it.
This was very similar to the book, and I love how they kept that detail. In the middle of the book and show, Lyra loses the alethiometer, which is a part of her learning experience of not just her relationship with the alethiometer, but she also knows its importance to finding Will's father. When they are getting the alethiometer back and physically interact with Mrs. Coulter and Boreal, though the show had a cool twist of how the scene played out, the book never touched on Lyra's violent intentions. She nearly slips and loses focus in the show of her true self, and I did not find this appeasing. I loved how the book showed Lyra being fearful for her alethiometer and shows her outward trust and will of getting it back for her. And yes, she acted childish and spit at Boreal, which I never liked that specific action in the book, but the book gave her witty words instead. The action of violence, though, was a bit much and would have been preferred as a hard pass. Will has a lot of fear of being seen or found and is very much described on numerous occasions that he is used to being a part of the background, as this is his trait, which is perfect for someone who can now easily slip through varieties of worlds. In the book, he panics often about his mother and wants to visit her so badly, but he constantly refrains. Now, the show had him looking through a window without physical contact, but Will is too fearful to even do this, even as a brief moment, and this felt like a small stray of his character traits. Now, when initially reading about Boreal bumping into Lyra at the museum, the book was super creepy, like borderline creeper style. I mean, he was even described as putrid and filthy in appearance with similar actions like Yofer. He reminded Lyra of Yofer's palace of disgust and destruction. His tongue even flicks like a snake. Though a strange book detail, I feel like that little twitch of the tongue would have been so fun and definitely hinted at his Damon connection. I just really enjoyed the descriptions and actions of Boreal as the villain inside the book. He was written really well for the show, but he really lusted for Mrs. Coulter, and that was heavily implied again and again in the show. In comparison to how he is just so much of a jerk, it was absolutely perfect for him. I can't help but mention the specters. The show had them seeming more like ghosts, which I thought was cool, but I love the book having them be more like a vampire action, as the book felt like they were figures kind of walking or floating, but their actions were of a vampire that literally sucked your soul. The ghostish particle appearance in the show just kind of consumed you, where the book gave this impression of the specter grabbing you and never leaving your side kind of creepiness, and I definitely envisioned them being way cooler in the book. The adults in Sidagazi get attacked by these specters, and it was kind of interesting how the Our World for Will's mother was similar traits of kind of losing her mental inclination and has the action of counting the bricks, which is similar to how the adults get attacked by these specters. Will's mother gives the appearance of someone who is sucked of their full life because of this internal loss of like mental growth, almost being sapped. And I feel this is more of a theory, but each of the worlds has something similar, and I just thought this was really cool to mention of the similar traits. Since we are chatting about Sidagazi, I can't help but mentioning the young children. You get the sense these kids hide, but they overrun the city. We do have Angelica, Paolo, and her brother Tullio, who is later then taken captive by the specters inside the book. But the use of Paolo was exchanged for a girl's name and appearance in the show instead, Paula. In the book, the aggression of Angelica and Paolo was heavily emphasized in hatred and violence. This did not seem to last long in the show. Though the change of appearance happened to Paolo, I definitely had the disconnect of friends rather than siblings. I prefer the siblings' details. They are red-headed kids, and siblings usually look pretty similar. The girls chosen had nothing in common. Though this is a very minor detail, it was a detail I did enjoy as an older sister. The protection of your brothers, especially younger siblings, is very strong. So I felt that emotion or expression was lost within the show. Japari, Perry, Grumman, or Shaman, whatever you want to call him, are all the names of Will's father. The book did well at impressing that this man had moved on because he could not return home. I think both sides of the coin for the book and show were both well done on such a unique character that only lasts in this specific book. The book implied that he lived in a little village of like 12 people, and he was very sickly. He was very much so, and neither of those things inside the show. He was very fit and clearly lived alone. He was also very witty to kind of encourage the fun sides of Lee, which I just personally loved. But I love that we got more screen time than planned. But some of the details were definitely lost in his original character story.
Tell me what I did before I became a scientist.
You were a nun, but you stopped believing and you left.
What is the most exciting part of this show is the little details that are added. The show does great at showing the different viewpoints, like the book for, of course, Lyra and Will, but for Lee, Mary, and Serafina. But the show also dives into other viewpoints in depth, like Boreals, Mrs. Coulter, and the Magisterium. Then we have the smallest of details, like Pan shifting in all sorts of animals. And the overall appearance of Sidagazi was just breathtaking and gave a perfect maze-like appearance. The city looked lost or left behind without second thought and felt desolate. Even the discussion of how to find the seams within the world and cut it, I absolutely loved this visually.
No, it's not only the knife that has to cut. So put your mind at the very tip of the knife. You're looking for a small gap. It's almost invisible, but the knife tip will find it.
The show was also really good at showing strength. Everyone felt equally matched in their own ways, which I thought was unique. We know that the witches are fast and super strong, but to physically see the action was mind-blowing, to say the least.
What can you do? I know you can fly, obviously, and you can kill pretty easily, and the cold doesn't affect you. and you can hear whispers on the wind.
We also know the voice hold Mrs. Coulter can have on her guests, and she continues to use it at her advantage. The Magisterium really starts to show their forces too, and the amount of men that are at their disposal. Not to mention, we get a little more detail of Mary's home life outside of work. Her relationship with her niece and nephew is just super sweet, and she is visibly exhausted. She is the closest to a normal character, but just speaks human. The show really entices the loss within Lyra. She has the realization of Jordan College not being in Will's Oxford. You see her excitedly running through the area and the sensation of closeness to realize her world is not truly there. We see Lyra just stare at the sight, and throughout the episode she seems to be in a near daze. But the most impactful loss in Lyra is missing her dearest friend Roger. We sense his death has impacted her hesitation with Will in the book, but the show really shows her hesitation and the actions she takes to keep her guard of staying back from Will, until they realize that they need each other to get the information for their destiny.
Once I change, you'll stop changing.
Is it Will that's changing you?
Their overall relationship just really grows throughout the show in a nice and gradual climb. The book only describes 2 moments of Pantalaimon communicating with Will, like when he loses his fingers and then later around the campfire being fearful. But the show does well of having Pan connecting with Will. He's trying to bridge the connection of their friendship between Lyra and Will. Though it is subtle, it is still an action being caught on the screen. The Magisterium understandably played a big part in Season 2. We got to see their form of a court system and how they twist their truths to the public. This bit of backstory really helps to feel well-rounded within the worlds and how they keep knowledge from the civilians. It also really enforces their fear of dust, or their version of sin. A unique kind of twist did happen in the story that I was not expecting, which was the involvement of Mrs. Coulter, where she can control the specters. She places herself in a certain state of mind that allows her to somewhat control or even communicate with them. We understand that her golden monkey is not able to have such a hold, but it is rather hesitant about the action. Now, this also makes sense to the book's relation. While in the book, she is at her campsite with a Magisterium visitor, and the witch is trying to spy on them. It makes you wonder how the specters were at bay for the surrounding campsite, and Coulter informs the witch of her daemon being killed. The show, in a kind of way, fills in those details that may not have been fully impressed upon the reader as we discussed this far.
How do you control them?
Well, they consume what makes us human, so I just hid that from them. I suppressed myself.
But I also really like the death of Boreal is clarified and outright. In this same campsite scene I just mentioned, it was hinted of a snake daemon being present in the tent. Now, no names are expressed since the scene is taken in the eyes of a witch not knowing the full scenario. The show fills in the blank for book 2, and I was really impressed by this change of its overall death scene. It was in the city instead of a campsite, and he was visibly fearful and in the presence of Mrs. Coulter, who he had a liking for. I love that they kept his death by poisoned wine, or 2K, which is basically the same thing, as this kept the true flair of his death scene. Now, Mrs. Coulter is still a maniacal woman and in search of her daughter Lyra. She simply does not hold back this season, and I hope to say the same for next as well if you catch my drift. She encourages, or rather persuades, the death of the Magisterium leader, and she is willing to risk her golden monkey's life a handful of times, and as I mentioned, even kills Boreal. This woman will stop at nothing to find Lyra. In some ways, it is selfish, and in some ways, it's a mother's intuition, I guess. But this woman is still psycho. I mean, she basically drugs and then locks Lyra in a box. This show just made her 10 times more out there than the book gave her credit for in book 2. The show even kept Joffrey, Grumman, or Perry, whichever name you want to call him, in a good position of character development. I did not care for the book's version of death by an angry witch. I wasn't a fan of this vengeance story. I felt it was petty. He also did not get to communicate with his son and only had a realization before his death in the book, where the show lets him shortly interact with his son with realization and guidance on how to be a better person. His whole role is with this prophecy and its importance. He has a brief moment of being a father for once, and especially since he is proud of how Will turned out without his guidance all along. His death was still sad, but it was understandable and preferred how he gave his life to protect his son by gunshot.
I'm so sorry, but look what you've become without me. You're a warrior.
We also have Seraphina and the witches building their army. They've faced much destruction in this season from the Magisterium's hands, which led them into further protection of Lyra and in search for Lord Asriel. This intense detail was unexpected, but important to their further sway from the Magisterium. The witches know of Lyra's prophecy, along with Will's over time, and they even know the original story of the First War.
This world is broken. It takes extraordinary people to fix it. Like your dad, like you. Take up his mantle.
What was done better overall was the unique connection of the cloud pine to the witches. Though gruesome in the beginning, it has been mentioned as a form of calling card, but the way it came out of the skin helps show the unique witch connection and how it calls to them specifically. It is also clarified it helps them fly too. Overall, this was really cool for the show to express and physically show in action.
Seraphina Peccola, I beg you, come help us.
While in the Magisterium courtroom, we learn of the witch's passage. It is a ritual performed that allows them to go long distances separated from their daemons, not cut like the man-made contraption. It was also very visible that Mrs. Coulter knew or was somewhat aware of the witch's ceremony. I mean, she did not seem fazed whatsoever, but this makes sense for the witches since we often see Kaisa separated in long distances from Seraphina, and it's an understanding that they still feel a light tug. Nothing super drastic like everyone else's connection to their daemons, like Lyra and Pan for instance, so is it possible that Mrs. Coulter is a witch? I mean, she is cunning and able to compel those whom she speaks to do her will. Witches have a similar sway. She's also very distant from her daemon. We see this clearly in this season. When she kills the witch, the golden monkey is on a different floor. When she is walking away from her golden monkey in the tower chamber, she nearly leaves him behind for good, but she definitely leaves him behind when she goes to visit Mary Malone. I mean, maybe this is a strong state of mind or personal will of her separation, like the way she communicates with the specters. But this woman is very knowledgeable. I do not doubt she has followed through with the ritual, since she also does not have the lost look like the others who are cut from their daemons. Whether this is true of Coulter's development or not, I find this to be a very interesting show detail. The Magisterium had quite a bit more screen time than expected. We see how they go about their judgments and decision making to protect the people. I do say this lazily. They really just control what they want people to believe is happening in hopes of reducing panic.
It is hardly heresy anymore. It is visible in the sky above our heads. If you would just leave the vessel to look at it.
But as expressed, the world has already been cut, and they can't remove that from the public. Their biggest enemy is dust, which they relate to sin. Though a lot are stuck in their old ways, Father MacPhail is willing to make adjustments and take actions into his own hands.
He's close there, to the change.
What change?
When you're a man, and the spectres can get you.
The fear of losing Will before he had gotten the knife from the specters felt very dramatic. We know he and Lyra are both at their peak of childhood to adulthood. When it becomes threatened that Will is at that brink of change as well, a level of fear feels overwhelming, as he was dangerously close to becoming an adult snack. We learn or know from the book that whomever wields or is in the presence of the knife can keep the specters at bay. I like seeing how this little piece of detail was played out. Lee is literally flying through worlds and living on the edge to get Lyra more protection. He views her as a daughter and will stop at nothing to guarantee that she is safe even after his death. Lee is just naturally a great person that you can't help but cry for him, not just in the book, but the show too. Personally, Lee is by far my favorite character, and that says a lot for how much I love the fluffy animals. I just have to express that it would have been better if they found a way to keep Lee alive. I know he was meant to die in the character arc, but come on! I really like his character. But on a more serious note, I would have preferred to see more Sitagazi kids. I know I mentioned this earlier, but it was really supposed to feel like a city overrun by kids due to lack of parental control. Though we get a small scene of children attacking Lyra and Will, there were a couple of brief occasions in the book that had groups of children just interacting. Though a small in-passing detail, it was a detail missing. Another minor detail is Mary's mess of an office. I'm glad we got to see stale cookies and dirty coffee mugs, but I wanted the office to feel cluttered and chaotic. Lack of organization for sure, as this is supposed to be a tired, overworked, and lost without her coffee kind of person. Literally a caffeine fiend. With a brain so intelligent as herself, organization of the office is the last thing on her mind. I know the show has got to be quite a budget between the unique creatures, the hired cast, and the overall world it's building. I thought the angels in the book were a cool addition. Seeing a little more of them would have been extra cool. Now, I could see them being a capture of attention for the third season since they do have a heavy involvement in getting to Azrael. We see them watching over Mary to not be killed by the specters, and we see Azrael speaking with them during a dramatic speech at the very end. I know they intrigued me in the book, so as a viewer, getting very brief glimpses would also intrigue anyone watching.
I'm no longer an aeronaut. We're insects now, traveling the world just like all the others.
You couldn't be an insect if you tried, Lee.
I thoroughly enjoyed the show just as much, if not more, than the book. It had every key moment with more flair and really expanded the universe. I am super hooked, and I hope season 3 does proper justice to the third book and that we get more shows just like this. You keep the reader on their seats while adding to the overall lore. What more can an avid reader ask for? Did you hear Roger's voice after the end credits of episode 7? What did you love or hate about season 2? Drop all your comments down below as I cannot wait to chat with you. Don't forget to like and subscribe for our next video. But until next time, stay nerdy and keep binging.